What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Riley's Retro 2017 NAIC format tournament. We've finally made it to the top 8. There's going to be best 2 out of 3 matches and plenty on the line, as the winner of this tournament will walk away with a sealed booster box of Scarlet and Violet base. So let's get into it. Getting right into things in our top 8, and we have Nick on the left playing this Mega Rayquaza Lycanroc GX deck, which is not an archetype I personally remember seeing during these days, but something that Nick brought to this tournament and was very strong. Lycanroc is a very strong Pokemon, as we see in future formats, and going to be able to have access to a GX attack in that Dangerous Rogue GX, and also the Gusting of the Bloodthirsty Eyes. And they're going to be going up against Chris on the right, playing Decidueye Vileplume, which was the deck that took second place at the NAIC in 2017. So this one is going to be a heavyweight match between the two of these decks, and we see the Tapu Lele Wonder tag already from Nick, getting the Pokemon Fan Club, which allows Nick to search for 2 basic Pokemon, put them into their hand. We saw the Rockruff and the Hoopa EX, and it's really interesting to see different approaches to this Mega Rayquaza deck, right? We saw in the last round, in round 5, on that winning in, we did see a Mega Rayquaza deck that was playing Fire Energy and Volcanion EX as a way to accelerate energy into this card pile with that Steam Up ability, and then put them back into play with Mega Turbo. And in this case, we see the Fighting Energy and the secondary attacker of this Lycanroc. And we also see differences in supporters. So this supporter of the Pokemon Fan Club able to just get 2 basic Pokemon, while of course Rayquaza thrives on being able to put basic Pokemon in play and use their abilities. It's a very ability heavy deck. So using that Fan Club to get the Hoopa means that Nick's able to get multiple EX Pokemon with that Scoundrel Ring and not put them straight to the bench with a card like Bridget, since this is going to be a when you play from hand onto the bench effect in that Scoundrel Ring, and also gets the Rockruff down, so has some versatility in what you can search with that as well. So pretty solid opening from Nick. Does also get the Mega Evolution, with, again, thanks to that Ancient trait. And on to Chris's turn. It's actually quite funny because Chris's deck also plays ways to kind of cheat evolutions into play with the Forest of Giant Plants. So both of these decks are kind of just like, well, to hell with conventions, we're just going to evolve our Pokemon whenever we want to. So pretty funny just to see the 2 decks here that kind of cheat those evolutions into play. But Chris is going to go ahead and play an Ultra Ball, discarding Field Blower and a Dartrix, and going to grab another Rowlet. And Chris's deck here, again, with this Decidueye Vileplume deck, while historically, the deck, being able to get multiple Decidueyes in play and then end your first turn with a Vileplume lock, which turns off items for both players as long as it is on the field. This is kind of a deck that I think a lot of players realized as the format went on, that you really wanted to just get as many Decidueyes down as you could to start using that Feather Arrow ability. You don't necessarily want to just go so crazy hard for that first turn Vileplume, since you end up just kind of hurting yourself in the long run. Not giving yourself time to set up your board with your own item cards, thin out your deck of those item cards. You kind of just end up sitting there like, well, I can't play the game myself, and I kind of just let my opponent, walk over my board without having any kind of threats established. And I think Chris kind of with a nod to that, just saying, I'm going to get as many Rowlets down as I can, has the 3 on the field already. And we do see an N from Chris, so hopefully finding that Forest of Giant Plants, some evolutions off of this would be great. And, getting some Feather Arrows down early, getting that 20 damage in play from the ability of that Decidueye is super relevant, super impactful to get as much damage as you can in play, and also just protecting your Pokemon. The Decidueye has 240 HP, which is, it does force the Mega Rayquaza deck to find the full bench of 8 Pokemon. And a Forest of Giant Plants would counter that Skyfield if Chris was able to find it. But no, just going to be a Tackle after benching the Oddish. So Not the most ideal turn one from this very explosive Decidueye Vileplume deck. Both of these decks actually are fairly explosive. So not the best turn from Chris there, only getting 10 damage on the board, but did at least get three. They wish they got 3 Decidueye down, 3 Rowlet down, and the Oddish as well off on the top of the bench there. And we do see an Ultra Ball. Didn't quite catch what was found off of that for Nick, but looking for a DCE this turn, or I suppose a Basic Fighting and a Mega Turbo would also get there. But just want to start putting out pressure on Chris's board. Would love to take a knockout, just kind of start the clock for Chris. And another thing that's going to be really important in this matchup for Nick is going to be the Hex Maniac supporter card. So typically these Rayquaza decks played 1, maybe even 2 copies of the Hex Maniac, and it turns off all abilities in play, which would turn off Vileplume, would also turn off the Feather Arrow. So it's going to be really important for Nick to find that card and find it at the right time. A well-timed Hex Maniac into a knockout could be really strong for Nick here. But first of all, you got to find that DCE. We saw a Skyla. I think it was a Skyla for an Ultra Ball, perhaps. And yep, there's an Ultra Ball. Going to discard N and Floatstone. So choosing directly to get the Ultra Ball off the Skyla instead of just playing a card like the N, I think maybe kind of just a nod to like, well, Chris's hand didn't seem to be too strong. They didn't really play much off their own N. I just don't want to end them. I think that's a pretty good read. We didn't see much out of Chris after that N. So I think it's a pretty good read there. I haven't gotten a good look at Chris's hand yet, but pretty intelligent heads up play there from Nick. And I'm going to grab a Shaman, so just wanting to draw some more cards. And looking for that DCE. We do have the Mega Turbo as well, so maybe even just a basic energy at this point will get the job done. And here's the Shaman set up for not sure how many. Looks like maybe 3 or 4. But any energy at this point will do it. We did already play the supporter from Nick's side, so need to find maybe another Shaman if you don't find the energy here. Some of these Rayquaza decks also played the Oricorio from Guardians Rising that searched out energy. I forget one of the dance. The names of all the Oricorios attacks and abilities were all like some kind of dance or something like that. So I don't quite remember which dance it was on that Oricorio, but I'm not sure if Nick plays something like that to help find energy. Again, in this deck that really kind of rewards you for just having a bunch of bench sitting Pokemon, that could be a card that Nick opts to play. But not sure what was found off that other Ultra Ball, and kind of with the full bench, Nick is keeping their hand off of the board, so can't quite see it. And Strong Energy goes to the Rockruff. Interesting, playing Strong Energy in this deck is a card that you can't attach to the Rayquaza, and actually you see it kind of punishing here. Nick not able to attach it to non-fighting Pokemon, so couldn't attach it to the active Rayquaza to take the knockout, and had to put it on the Rockruff, which does set up the threat of a dangerous rogue on the following turn, which is, nothing to scoff at, but kind of foregoing that in favor of being able to take a knockout here and just passing the turn after a Mega Evolution on the bench. So not the strongest turn from Nick either, and we are just going to see the end from Chris, but it was super unfortunate that Nick was unable to get that KO, and again, kind of questioning, like, is Strong Energy the best? I mean, maybe it's just a 1 or 2 of in this deck. I could see it being, relevant in certain matchups potentially, but yeah, it does kind of hurt Nick here. So, but moving on from that, Chris looking for that Force of Giant Plant, still very elusive. I don't see anything in hand yet. Not sure what they see off of this Trainer's Mail. I think I see a couple Dartrix in hand off of that N. And it looks like a couple supporters off of the Trainer's Mail. It looks like a Sycamore, there's a Level Ball as well, a Lysander. But importantly, there's a Forest of Giant Plants in hand, but I don't see an out to Decidueye. So we could end up seeing a Sharp Blade Quill, which is Dartrix's attack that lets you just do 20 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Probably not the best. We could also just see Chris retreat here. Again, I don't see a Decidueye. There is that Forest of Giant Plants. And does Chris want to play that card here and free up some of these? You know, now you discard the Skyfield, and now Nick does have to discard Pokemon, which does hurt their damage output in the long run. It does also kind of get rid of something like that Hoopa, which could be a valuable Lysander target later in the game. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. And we do just see the Sky Return. So we saw the retreat into the Shaman and a Sky Return for 30 damage, throwing up this Tapu Lele. So this line makes sense with the play of that Forest of Giant Plants. Now you're kind of pushing up this Tapu Lele and saying, you got to find another Skyfield and a 6th bench Pokemon, plus the energy to knock out this Tapu Lele. And if you do, now I can end you on a following turn. And I'm protecting all of my stage 1s. Chris did actually find 3 Dartrix and a Gloom. So all of these grass evolution Pokemon are kind of just chilling on the bench, waiting to evolve. And especially with that, looks like a VS Seeker for an N, which Nick is going to play right here, means that those bench Pokemon are safe. Not that I don't think Nick would ever really target them down, especially since they are unevolved. They are just worth a single prize, but just kind of just protect them. And, you know, Chris can kind of say, well, if you whiff the knockout, now I have another attacker in the active. And it's probably the least valuable thing on their board. So off this end, Nick's still desperately looking for energy of any kind except for strong energy. I guess you could dangerous rogue the Tapu Lele if you found another strong energy. I'm not sure you really want to waste it here, but wow, just a pass from Nick. So not finding energy again. And that hurts. And actually, not evolving this Rockruff too could be pretty dangerous. If Chris is able to find, it's asking a lot, but if Chris is able to find triple Decidueye, we could see a knockout on that Rowlet with just Feather Arrow abilities. So a little bit scary to not evolve that. Chris probably could choose to just spread the damage differently. Could potentially just pile a lot of damage on this active Mega Rayquaza, but we'll see. And that's kind of the strength of this Decidueye deck, is that over time, when you're able to get many Feather Arrows going, you're able to kind of soften up lots of your opponent's Pokemon to put them in range of your other attacks, especially this Tapu Lele. And looks like Chris had 3 DCE in hand. Actually, Chris's hand looks pretty terrible. I see like the 2 DCE plus one that was just attached, some Forest of Giant Plants, some green Pokemon that are not Decidueyes, and just this level wall finding another Dartrix. I don't even know if the 4th Rowlet's in deck, so this actually looks like a pretty terrible hand from Chris. I think it's 2 DCE, 2 Forest of Giant Plants, and yuck. But importantly, this Rayquaza is still kind of just stuck here, so Nick not really putting out too much pressure either. Neither player has taken a prize at this point, and we did see the energy drive, so I still kind of like Chris's setup a little bit more. You know, putting out a little bit of pressure. There's a good chunk of damage on the active Rayquaza, and if you ignore the Tapu Lele, even with Chris's terrible hand, with all the DCEs in hand, you can start to, you know, pile DCEs onto that Lele and, you know, threaten to knock out this active Mega Rayquaza. We saw a big Sycamore there from Nick. Going to be looking for energy still, that elusive energy. I think might even have access to Mega Turbo. And actually we saw the Sycamore, I think they had an Ultra Ball in hand that they chose not to play. There's merit to potentially discarding a Pokemon you're not going to need. Maybe like another Mega Rayquaza, just kind of thin your deck out a little bit, or even just kind of look through and see what you have access to in the deck. I just personally would have done that. I don't know that it matters too much, but I always like to kind of search the deck and thin cards out. You never know. You might see something you want to thin out. So there is the payment of retreat, attach of the DCE, and a Mega Turbo. So we are going to see an attack from the fresh Rayquaza, which is pretty strong here, but it is going to be short of a KO, hitting only 150 damage on this Tapu Lele. There was no Skyfield or a 6th Pokemon to bench, so just going to be short of the KO, and that's really not where Nick wants to be. And also kind of allowing this active Rayquaza to take damage. I mean, you don't want to give up the 2 prizes by leaving the damaged one in the active either, but this is also kind of sketchy, letting your second Rayquaza take this much damage. It's going to get hit for 100 here. So both of your Rayquazas kind of in range of a potential Feather Arrow plus Razor Leaf from a Decidueye in the future. But Chris, once again, still just staring at a board of green stage 1s. There is no Decidueye to be found, no Ultra Balls, no draw supporter. This is terrible from Chris, but again, still in a really strong spot. You know, Nick is able to put out a lot of pressure, but still hasn't taken any prizes to this point. Will take 2, obviously, this turn as we see the knockout with the Emerald Break. But Chris kind of has some time. You know, you got... Oh, and there's a Sycamore off the top. So Chris... All right, Chris can play the game again. We see the Forest of Giant Plants. And again, we're really just... really just looking for some Stage 2... grass Pokemon off the Sycamore. There's the Ultra Ball. There's a Floatstone as well, so this Oddish going to be able to move out of the active, which is which is nice for Chris. And the Grass Energy as well, so we could see a Razor Leaf this turn, and would have loved to find more than just the 1 Decidueye, but 1 is better than none. I think Chris can be happy with that much at least. Getting some damage in with Feather Arrow plus the Razor Leaf as well. Could also see a Hollow Hunt, but I think you kind of want to just put the pressure on with this Razor Leaf. And this is a situation where the Rockruff could come in. If Chris benches another Pokemon, we could see a Dangerous Rogue for a knockout. I don't think Chris will bench the Pokemon. Oh, as I say that, Chris does bench the Shaman, and wow, found 2 Decidueye and a Vileplume off of that, I believe. So that was probably worth benching the 5th Pokemon there, just to get these Decidueyes down. So I thought it was another Decidueye. It might be a Tapu Lele. Yeah, I think it was a Tapu Lele as well, but found the Ultra Ball. So this is huge, going to effectively get that 3rd Decidueye, and this is exactly what Chris wanted this turn, getting the attack with Razor Leaf. You have all of this residual damage with Feather Arrow to play with, and there is the Revitalizer going to get back Vileplume and probably just whatever other grass Pokemon is in there. You do have to take 2 if there are 2 valid targets. And yeah, I think that's what we were clarifying at the table. I think there was a Dartrix in there. So Chris going to get back the Dartrix as well. Kind of unfortunate to have to put a dead card back in your hand, but that's how the card works. So there's the 3rd Decidueye coming into play, and now Chris looking and saying, where do I want to place this damage? Feather Arrow's going on to the active. Looks like at least 2. I didn't quite catch if that was 2 or 3. I think it was just 2. I think there's the 3rd one to play with. Yep, looks like it's going on the benched Rayquaza as well. So both Rayquazas going up to 140 damage. There's the Vileplume as well, activating the Allergic Pollen, one of the pollen abilities that turns off items for both players. So neither player will be able to play an item this turn, unless something like a Hex Maniac comes down from it. That is an option. Yep, there was the big knockout with Razor Leaf as well. So Chris tying up the game, 4 prizes apiece. And this is another situation now where Nick needs to find energy, needs to find the Lycanroc, and does not have the help of items to get to that point. You cannot play cards like VS Seeker or Ultra Ball. So Nick really gonna need to find the pieces just out of the hand as it is. There's the energy attachment though, so that's a good first step. And the bench of the Giratina promo. So this was a card that was specifically in the deck for Greninja, since it was able to turn off their giant water shuriken ability. It turns off the abilities of all break evolved Pokemon. So not really something that Nick wants to put down in this matchup. It does have a 2 retreat cost, which is kind of just a liability off of something like a Lysander, but wanted to Shaman for more cards, and the extra bench sitters do boost your damage, so you kind of have plenty of bench liabilities in this deck. And there's the Lycanrocs. We do find that off the Shaman's setup, and this means that the Dangerous Rogue is now available. And another kind of piece of synergy that I'm noticing here with this Lycanroc, wow, there's the Hex Maniac too. So now Nick able to play item cards, and this also turns off the Feather Arrows from Chris on the following turn, since it will carry over that ability lock into the next turn. So Chris not going to be able to use Feather Arrows on the following turn, which is really important. But going back to the point about the Lycanroc in this deck with the Sky Fields, it kind of says like you can use this Sky Field since it is a stadium, both players have access to it. And you can say like, if you want to use my Sky Field and put extra Pokemon in play, be my guest. But now I'm going to use Dangerous Rogue, which does 50 damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. And you can do huge damage if they overfill their bench with that Sky Field especially. So we do see the Dangerous Rogue there, a big GX attack taking the knockout, and the Field Blower. So now Chris, of course, able to play items this turn. Since the Hex Maniac did come down, it does turn off Vileplume, not only during Chris's turn, or Nick's turn, but also into Chris's turn here. So no access to Feather Arrows, but Chris can use items this turn. So we saw the Field Blower and now the Trainer's Mail. Trainer's Mail finding, looks like Lysander or N. There is the N. Oh, and Nick going immediately to put the cards into the deck. You always had to be careful with this with N. Okay, so Chris is just going to play it, but that was always something you had to be very careful of with N and cards like Judge as well in standard format, where you need to make sure you know that your opponent is playing the card before you put things into your deck, because as soon as those cards enter your deck, they are now private knowledge, the game state is broken, and that can end up with some pretty unfortunate penalties. So luckily, no such thing here. Chris did end up just playing the N, so no harm, no foul. But always be careful of that. I always like to put my hand down, and I will not touch things until my opponent actually plays the card, so always need to be wary of that. But anyway, Chris looking for, I don't know if there's enough energy attached. Yeah, I think it's just the one grass energy. So going to bring up this Decidueye with the grass energy, and we could see a Hollow Hunt GX this turn. Looks like that's what Chris is eyeing. And the kind of awkward thing about Lycanroc in this matchup is that it's weak to grass. So the Razor Leaf does 90 damage base, times 2 is 180 with that grass weakness, and then one single Feather Arrow can knock out the 200 HP Lycanroc. So it's a little bit awkward to put it down in this matchup, but since Nick was taking all of the energy out of play for Chris, that was pretty significant. It wasn't really, you weren't really at risk that turn. So, and then the Hollow Hunt, I think it was for N, Lysander, and DCE, I believe. So Nick probably looking for something like an N this turn, or could just outright win the game with a full bench and the Emerald Break, or even something like a Lysander on one of those low HP Shaman EX on the bench. But not seeing a ton here. That end 2 probably hurt pretty bad. So we see the payment of the retreat, and Nick just considering what to bring up here. Either the heavily damaged Rayquaza or the Tapu Lele. I think I agree with the Tapu Lele with the Floatstone here. But of course we do know that Chris took Lysander off of the Hollow Hunts. We know that the Lysander's in hand for Chris, as well as that DCE, but bringing up the Floatstone Lele at least gives you the most options. So you have to assume that this poor Rayquaza is going down this turn, and there's the Lysander bringing it up. So Nick is now really on the back foot. There are no other energy in play for them. There's no energy on the bench Rayquaza. There's no energy even on the Lycanroc, which you definitely wouldn't want to attack with anyway. Nope, can't play that level ball this turn. The ability lock is reactivated, and I actually think there was one too many Feather Arrows applied there, but we did catch that. And then there's the Razor Leaf knockout. So this is kind of a rough spot for Nick to be in. There's not really much you can do. There's no energy in play. I think Chris kind of just has this one on board. There's the DCE. We do see the energy drive. So I guess it could be the next turn if we're finding another DCE maybe and a Lysander or something like that. This Lele could put out some pressure, but Really looking for, well, the end is definitely going to hurt both players. Does put Chris down to 2 cards, Nick down to 2 again. Nick's hand definitely didn't seem like it was that strong, but the benefit here from Chris's standpoint is that they have these feather arrows, so we could also just see like a retreat into the Vileplume or something like that. Just hide behind something and then just throw these feather arrows out. Kind of a way to just kind of passively progress the board state, progress your win condition. So, ooh, choosing to leave the Decidueye in the active, trusting that the N, oh, I think yeah, we see, okay, so we see the 2 feather arrows and a Razor Leaf. So this is a little bit scary. If Nick is able to find an additional energy here, would need another DCE, but Nick could take the knockout, and we see the Oranguru. So Instruct, does Oranguru come through? Do we find a DCE, or what do we find off the Instruct? Looks like a whole lot of nothing. Nick's going to concede, and Chris will take game 1. Back at it with game 2 now, and Nick's going to get to go first in this one, hoping to get some energy down, get some Mega Rayquazas in play, take advantage of that ancient trait, and Chris going to have a mulligan here, so the extra cards will definitely help Nick. Want to also play as many item cards as you can, as early as you can. Playing around that Vileplume is very, very strong if you're able to kind of just thin out so many of your items, especially if you're able to get things like the Spirit Links in play. Even if you're not able to evolve immediately, it is still very strong to get the Spirit Links in play and just establish something that can evolve without ending your turn. A second mulligan from Chris. And again, the extra card's really going to benefit Nick here. So speaking about the matchup, this is definitely a pretty close matchup. I think it really kind of focuses on the Stadium War, the Forest of Giant Plants versus Skyfield, and also how quickly either deck can set up. You know, you're able to get that Vileplume out early, then maybe something like the Spirit Links can't be found, the Mega Turbos can't be found. A third mulligan from Chris. Oh, it is not what they want to see here. Definitely don't want to be giving Nick this many cards, this many extra cards going first in this one. Hopefully finding some basic Pokemon here. Saw something green, might have been a Gloom. Okay, it's a basic Pokemon. We are good. Only the 3 extra cards for Nick, and we are going to get underway in this one. So Rockruff start and a Rowlet start. Immediately see a Rayquaza. And Nick looking at like a 9 or 10 card hand here and saying, I have lots of choices. Hopefully. Hopefully for Nick. It's like we're eyeing up an Ultra Ball. Yep, there is the Ultra Ball, discarding the Skyla and a Fighting Energy. So Skyla is a funny card in this format, in this deck. The Skyla was not really super played outside of this deck. You kind of saw it in like stage 2 decks that required rare candy, like Tapu Bulu. Vikavolt decks would typically play it, but where you have so much additional card draw with the heavy counts of Shaman EX in this deck, the Skyla was a really crucial card to kind of get that missing piece, like a Spirit Link, a Mega Turbo, an Ultra Ball. It just kind of fit nicely into this deck, since it is a very combo heavy deck. It does rely very heavily on specific item cards in a specific order as well. So, and also the Stadium too, you can find it off of Skyla. So Skyla was, again, a card you didn't really see too much, but it fits very nicely in this Rayquaza deck. And we do see it getting Ultra Ball away here, but just a pretty strong supporter in a format where it was kind of considered a weaker card overall. But there's the Hoopa Scoundrel Ring, going to get some additional Pokemon plus the Shaman and a DCE as well. That's really good. And what else do we have out of this hand? Again, Nick having so many cards in hand. I wonder if they'll be able to Shaman at all. They'd only thin out a few with that Ultra Ball. And yeah, just see the Mega Evolution to pass the turn. So not playing the Shaman, I think, again, Nick's hand, thanks to those mulligans, was fairly large. So I'm not sure Nick would have been able to thin out any cards to take advantage of that setup. But now it's kind of awkward because if Chris is able to pop off and get the Vileplume down, you might not have ways to thin out your hand on the next turn. So, but again, I think it was still correct. Like, you don't want to bench the Shaman for 1 here. It depends on how many you're drawing and what you have access to in the following turn. Like, if you have no supporter or something like that, you could set up for 1 kind of out of desperation, but I like the choice to hold off on that. And meanwhile, Chris is going to play a Level Ball. Looks like getting an Oddish this time. I can't quite tell what it is. The glare was very annoying. We were actually playing in a cafeteria of this like huge mall area in the venue. Oh no, spilling the cards out all over the table. At least this is game 2, so Nick knows what's in the deck already, so it's not not like you're giving up your secrets there. But yeah, we had some like overhead lights in the like the cafeteria area. So they were a little bit annoying, kind of hard to deal with for the glare, so I apologize for that. But there's the Ultra Ball, getting rid of the Oddish and the Rowlet that were found. So this signifies to me that there's probably a Revitalizer in hand, and this is just a way to thin out more cards. And yep, there's the Shaman. So seems like Chris kind of just dumping cards out of the hand to set up for more here. Looks like there's an N, there's the Revitalizer as well. And once again, Chris looking for that crucial Forest of Giant Plant Stadium card. Playing very fast, we see the setup from Shaman and the attachment down to the Rowlet, which is also very strong. And not finding too much off of that. Didn't see a Forest of Giant Plants. Already had the N, so yeah, pretty much just this Rowlet, unfortunately. Excuse me. So all that was really found off of that setup. So definitely, if you're able to find that Forest of Giant Plants, again, this early turn, or this early game, stadium battle is going to be really important, but Chris, the value for Chris is a very immediate in that you're able to play the Forest of Giant Plants and then evolve straight up. Whereas the Skyfield from Nick kind of needs to stay in play. It's the longevity that matters. So Chris's stadiums are really kind of like, I play it, I use it, and then it just sits there. And then its biggest impact is that it's not a Skyfield. But for Nick, it needs to kind of have that longevity over the course of the match. So, but not finding it or not finding any evolutions to take advantage of it. I think I did see a Forest in Chris's hand, but if you don't really have the evolutions to take advantage of it, there's no point in playing it since you know that Nick plays a bunch of stadiums their own. So there's the Mega Turbo from Nick. Looking for something like a Float Stone to get this Rockruff out of the active. That also was not the attachment for turn, so we could just see the payment of retreat off of this Rockruff to bring it to the bench. And there's the Oranguru as well, so Instruct going to be online if Nick's able to find some extra cards to discard out of the hand, thin that hand down. There is the Via Seeker for Skyla. So we talked about that Skyla earlier. This could be a situation where you're finding the crucial card that's missing, like that Float Stone. So now Nick able to have a knockout lined up this turn with that Skyla. And we'll see what else they can get here. Has the Ultra Ball as well, pitching a Lele and a Mega Rayquaza. Hopefully, probably finding a backup Rayquaza or something like that. Maybe a Shaman to just fill up the hand again. And this also has the added benefit, of course, of thinning the hand down. We might be able to see and instruct for some amount of cards here too. So Nick's deck really having lots of on-board draw between the Oranguru and then obviously finding Shamans. This deck usually plays 4 copies of Shaman EX as well, so plenty of draw from Nick's side. And hasn't used a single Shaman yet, so that's always nice to have access to so many of those in the deck. Instinct was grabbed off the Ultra Ball. I have to assume it was a Shaman or a Rayquaza. Those would be the two things that I would guess. Can't quite see their hand is just off screen here. It looks like it's only 2 or 3 cards too, so I have to imagine that there's the... Oh, it's a Lycanroc. Okay. We're going to bring up the Shaman. So Nick with the game 1 going against them. I think this is kind of a way of saying, like, I need to be aggressive. Time was already running low in this one. These are best of 3 50 minutes, and I did have some cuts around this as well. So this one was actually getting pretty close to the end of time. When we were already in game 2, that game 1 was very long and grindy. So Nick kind of just saying, I need to take prizes. I need to be quick as possible to try to end this game as soon as I can and force a game 3 that we can finish. And again, where both decks are very fast in setting up, but they do also take a lot of time with so many game actions, so many deck searches. These decks really have a lot that they're trying to cram into that 50-minute best of 3 window. So I like this play from Nick. Very aggressive, and will actually find, they made this whole play relying on that Instruct from Oranguru, and were able to find the Hoopa. So the Hoopa gets now the Shaman and a bunch more of the EX Pokemon with that Scoundrel Ring. So I think that was a very strong turn from Nick, of course, getting the 2-prize knockout, but also just the way it was sequenced, I think was very well managed that turn. It's always scary to rely on just 3 cards from Oranguroo's Instruct, but you gotta trust the monkey sometimes. It does reward your faith. So there is the level ball from Chris. And now, of course, with Chris up in this one, it's kind of a tricky situation because, you know, you are up 1 game and you kind of want to hold on to that 1-0 lead if you can, but also if you're, you know, going to get run over in this game, you need to scoop as soon as possible to preserve time for that 3rd game. So plenty of time still available, and, you know, Chris is only down 2 prizes, so they should be able to kind of piece something together in this one. And the right draws off of this Sycamore. And there is the Dartrix and a DCE. So looking for a Decidueye here would be great. Ooh, I didn't see much of anything off of that Sycamore though. And I mean, I think you could potentially get the Vileplume here, but this goes back to my point in game 1 where I mentioned that you really want to focus on getting these Decidueyes in play. Did at least find the Rowlet and a Dartrix. So that's not the worst case scenario. But yeah, Chris not finding any Decidueyes this turn. And now that poor Dartrix on the bench with all the energy committed is just begging to be Lysandered from Nick this turn. We see the evolution into Gloom. So once again, Chris just not finding those big GX or stage 2 grass Pokemon. Just not finding the Decidueyes. This is really, you know, irregular for this deck that plays so many search cards, so many consistency cards. We didn't see a Trainer's Mail, no Ultra Balls or anything like that. So really unfortunate and awkward draws from Chris here. But Nick, no mercy, got to take advantage of this one if you're going to come back in this series. There is the VS Seeker for Skyla once again. And Skyla really paying dividends in this one. Love to see that. I think it's the only supporter Nick has played so far. And there's a Skyla for a Hex Maniac. So supportering for a supporter always feels weird. But this guarantees that you know where to find that Hex Maniac. And Chris has got to be looking at that thinking, boy, that sucks. If I'm going to come back in this game, I know that I'm going to get hexed on the next turn. So I have to find an N as well on top of what I'm already missing. That is not where Chris wants to be. There's the Emerald Break for the knockout. And Chris finds a Sycamore, but that's not an N. And you know you're still going to get hexed on the following turn. So you can do all of this, put all the pressure in the world you want out with all of these feather arrows and everything if you're able to find them, if you're even able to find them. But you know that Hex Maniac is coming down next turn. So very scary situation to be in. And Chris actually going to choose to Lysander the Hoopa here instead. This is a very heads-up play saying, I'm going to try to deny this knockout, bring up a hefty 2-retreat Pokemon, stick the Vileplume down, and activate Item Lock. So now you have to find a double colorless energy exactly to retreat. And this might mean that Nick can't play that Hex Maniac in addition to attacking. It has to be like a Sycamore or something like that to choose between the two. So Chris making kind of a last chance gambit here. I like it, but unfortunately there's the DCE, and Chris just going to scoop them up and preserve time for a game 3. And we are tied in top 8. Well, unfortunately, this is where a game 3 would be if I had one. Unfortunately, I was recording these as separate files so that I would kind of mitigate the issues potentially, but unfortunately, this 3rd game did not record. The file was corrupted or something like that, so we do not have the actual footage for this game 3, unfortunately. But Chris does actually go on to win this one. Again, as I mentioned, time was running pretty low, so Chris was able to squeak it out with the prize advantage in a very short game 3. I'm so sorry that we had to miss the kind of penultimate game 3 here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.